If this movie does not win Best Sound at the Oscars...
We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you.
23.
Hey, what is up, you guys? This is Steffi, aka In My Humble Opinion, and welcome back to another IMHO Film Club movie review. In today's video, we are going to continue on our Oscar frontrunner movie reviews, and we are talking about The Sound of Metal. So The Sound of Metal stars Riz Ahmed, Olivia Cooke, Paul Raci, Lauren Ridloff, and Chelsea Lee, who are deaf actors, and Matthew Almaric. So a little bit on Matthew Almaric. He was actually in a movie called Diving Bell and the Butterfly. And this was a movie that I saw for the first time when I was in college. And I mentioned this movie because Diving Bell and the Butterfly actually has sort of a similarity to The Sound of Metal, where, you know, The Sound of Metal is essentially a story about a guy who loses his ability to hear. Diving Bell and the Butterfly is about a guy who suddenly becomes paralyzed, and literally every part of his body becomes paralyzed except for his left eye. So, you know, because he's paralyzed, the camera does like really cool things in terms of just like staying stable, and they do some cool POV shots because he can only see through a left eye. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that movie up because I feel like if you liked Sound of Metal, you would really like this movie. And it's one of those movies that whenever anyone asks like, oh, hey, what's your favorite movie? And you want to like pick a cool, artsy movie that will make you look like smart, this is the movie that I usually say is my favorite movie. Like, it is, but there's other movies too, but this is that pick. But yeah, I just thought I would mention it at the top. But going back to Sound of Metal, this movie was directed by Darius Martyr, with story by Derek, Sean France, and Darius Martyr, screenplay by Abraham and Darius Martyr. So The Sound of Metal is a story about a heavy metal drummer played by Riz Ahmed, who is also a recovering addict, and he begins to experience hearing loss to the point where it changes his life forever, and he must learn how to navigate the world as a deaf person. So Oscar-wise, Sound of Metal was nominated for 6 Oscars. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Original Screenplay, Film Editing, and Sound. So as in all my movie reviews here on this channel, I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons, and then I'm going to give my overall rating and review at the very end. So let's get into it. Okay, so let's talk about the pros. So my first pro to Sound of Metal is its original story. So I know at the very top of this video, I mentioned Diving Bell and the Butterfly and about how there's like a similarity between that movie and this movie, but still, I would say the story of Sound of Metal is original to me, at least. I've never watched a movie that specifically focused on the experience of an adult musician who loses his ability to hear over time and how he deals with that journey. I've never watched a story like this before. And when you think about it, it's actually a very simple, straightforward premise that doesn't try to overcomplicate itself, which, you know, just goes to show you that sometimes the simplest stories end up being the best stories. My second part of this movie is the sound design. So aside from this movie having an original story, it's the way that that story is conveyed through its sound design that really makes it stand out. And what makes their use of sound design really cool is that they use it to put us in the perspective of Riz Ahmed's character. How is he now hearing the world? So if you notice while watching this movie, in the very beginning, they really played up the normal everyday sounds that he would hear, from the coffee maker to the music that he would dance to with his girlfriend, to even his heavy breathing while he exercised. They really played up, these are the everyday sounds that Ruben would hear. So then when he starts losing his ability to hear, you really felt that change for him. When the movie would harshly cut from the silent POV of Ruben to the noise of a non-deaf person's world, it was both startling and devastating. But for me, perhaps my favorite moment in terms of sound design was after he got his cochlear implant, and specifically when he was in Paris. The way the movie would smoothly transition from the real world noise he was hearing at this French party to what it actually now sounded like to him with the cochlear implant was just really, really cool. And it makes you understand why he decides to, spoiler alert, not really wear the cochlear implant by the end of the movie, which on that note, My third pro to this movie is its title. I just thought the title was really clever. I think because his character is a heavy metal drummer, the initial gut instinct would be, oh, that's why this movie is called Sound of Metal. But deep inside, I knew, I was like, no, there has to be more to this. And when the doctor switches on his cochlear implant and is asking him, what do you hear? What does it sound like? My mouth slowly opened at the realization as Ruben was struggling to find the words. And I was like, oh my God, it sounds like the sound of metal. So yeah, I just thought the title was really clever and clearly appropriate. My fourth pro to this movie is obviously the performances. You know, I thought everyone was really solid, but I have to say a special shout out to Riz Ahmed and Paul Raci, who are both Oscar nominated for their performances in this movie. Starting off with Riz Ahmed first. Gosh, what a performance. You could genuinely feel the panic and stress that he was going through in the very beginning when he was initially starting to lose his hearing. I actually cried in the beginning of this movie because I was so stressed and devastated for him, because I can only imagine, like, first of all, what losing your sense of hearing feels like, but for a musician to lose their sense of hearing, like, that's like everything to them. And I was just thinking, like, for me, like, I'm a huge fan of music, and on top of that too, I used to be a dancer growing up, so music was a huge part of my life. And just the thought of never being able to, like, hear my favorite songs again, or to hear the voices of, like, my family and friends, or even just, like, laughter, like, it literally brought me to tears. I was like, this is so sad, and I'm so sorry. Like, I felt so bad for him. And I heard some people say that his character arc throughout this movie was essentially watching someone go through the stages of grief. And I would completely agree with that, because you see him go through anger and denial and bargaining and depression, and then finally acceptance at the very end. He just does such a great job in this movie. Now, going over to Paul Raci's character, he plays a guy named Joe who sort of like runs and is the leader of this deaf community that Riz Ahmed joins. And that character is, oh man, what a solid guy. One of my favorite scenes in this movie is when Ruben comes back to the home after he gets his cochlear implant, and Joe is just sitting at the table waiting for him, and Ruben breaks the news to Joe what he did. And just that scene alone, I swear, that has to be the scene that got Paul Raci his Oscar nomination. He is so good in that scene. And my fifth pro to this movie is just the representation of the deaf community. So, you know, you don't often see stories about the deaf community represented in mainstream media. And when it is portrayed in movies and TV shows, the portrayal of the deaf community is very glossy and it's very clean. And sometimes it could be a bit borderline preachy, honestly. But what I liked about The Sound of Metal's portrayal of the deaf community is that it just felt like a real no BS portrayal. I like that this movie was never asking you to feel sorry for them at all, because the fact that they can't hear doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with them. They do not need to be fixed in any way. And ultimately, they are people too, beyond just their condition. And like I said in the beginning too, I love that this movie actually cast deaf actors like Lauren Ridloff and Chelsea Lee to play deaf characters. It just added to the realness and the overall authenticity of the movie. Alright, so now let's move on to the cons. So I only have one con for this movie, and that is some of its plot holes. So normally I'm not this kind of person that likes to poke holes in the story and be like, well, that doesn't make sense that would happen. I have a pretty good suspension of disbelief, but there were two glaring plot holes for me that kind of made me go, So the first one was, did the doctor not disclose to Ruben that the sound he would hear in his cochlear implant would not be the sound that he was used to hearing before he went deaf? I get that that was a dramatic moment in the movie, and I felt shocked and he looked shocked, but then at the same time I was like, she didn't disclose this to him? I don't know if that was the movie's way of making a statement about cochlear implants, but yeah, I felt betrayed, honestly, watching that scene. And I just couldn't help but think, like, doesn't she have like a medical duty to disclose this information to him? I don't know. And then my second plot hole question that I had, and this was the one that like honestly bothered me the most was, how did he afford to go to Paris? And the reason why this bothered me the most is because the movie literally went out of its way to repeatedly remind you that Ruben was running out of money, or like literally had no money. In fact, the fact that he had no money is what drove this character to make the decisions he made. A lot of the reasons why he made the decisions that he made was, yes, based on the fact that he wanted the cochlear implant, but it was also tied to his financial status. And for the movie to just like repeatedly remind us of the fact that like, yeah, he's like running out of money, or he has no money, and then suddenly like 2 scenes later, he flies out to France, just made no sense to me. And for me, I just hate when the logic of a movie or a TV show is broken for the conveniency of plot. If you wrote your character into a corner, you have to commit to the corner. So my overall rating for The Sound of Metal is an A-. With its visceral performances and creative use of sound, Sound of Metal gives you insight into a community and experience that unfortunately gets overlooked. This is a movie that I recommend everyone watch at least once because it provides you with much needed perspective, especially if you are not deaf or hard of hearing. I even started questioning and challenging the way the world worked in general for those who are from that community. And while I have closed captioning turned on for all my videos, I myself started thinking of ways I can make my videos more inclusive and accessible. And before I end this review, I just wanted to give a shout out to another person here on YouTube that reviewed this movie. His name is Yat. His YouTube channel is actually called Let There Be Ears, and I'll leave a link to his review for Sound of Metal in the description box, but definitely check it out because he actually reviews this movie from the perspective of someone who is deaf and hard of hearing. So yeah, definitely check it out because as important as representation is on screen and for the people who are behind the camera making the movie, representation is also important in terms of who gets to critically talk about these movies. And I think the fact that he is someone actually from this community is really important. So check out his review. I watched it and I learned a lot. So yeah, I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. All right, well, that's about it for this video. If you liked it, please give this video a thumbs up. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and please turn on the notification button down below so you know when a new video from me comes out, and comment down below your thoughts on The Sound of Metal. What do you think its chances are in different Oscar categories? I really don't know how well it's gonna do in the other categories, but I feel like if anything, it has to win Best Sound because the sound is just really, really well designed in this movie. But yeah, that's pretty much it. As always, everything I said was just my own personal thoughts and all my humble opinion, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!